The royal architect is in trouble. The king is mad. There's a goblin problem. Over the last few weeks, while the royal architect was working on other projects for the good and glory of the realm, the goblins have not been idle. First, they stole 42 pounds of the king's favorite cheese. Then they absconded with 83 yards of shimmering gold cloth intended for the queen's new gown. And worst of all, they made off with Princess Petunia while she was taking a bath. All right? Well, maybe that last one wasn't entirely their fault. Still, the king has had quite enough. He summons the royal architect to his office. "I want a castle," he says, brandishing a crudely drawn picture of a fortress that looks suspiciously like a toilet paper roll that goblins can't get into no matter how clever they are. Now I know that may sound like an impossible task, but that's why I'm paying you the big bucks, because I know you're up to the task. Fail, and you will answer to me. Oh, and also, the king adds with a wink, if you can come up with a design that works, the princess's hand in marriage shall be yours. The royal architect swallows hard and takes the king's proffered piece of parchment. He's going to need some time to work on this. Designing a castle is hard work. Even if you have an expert team of architects, engineers, artists, and contractors on your side, it still takes time. But the king isn't going to give the royal architect months or even weeks. No, he's given him only 7 days to design his dream goblin-proof castle. If he doesn't have something ready by then, he'll be sent back to Royal Architecting School with a big fat F on his report card, and maybe lose his head besides. And when you put it like that, it really puts a little spring in your step. But what sort of castle could possibly keep those fiendish goblins out? And what would happen if the royal architect failed? Well, let's find out. Welcome to another episode. Today we're talking about those scurrying sewer dwellers, goblins. They're not just stupid, ugly, and mean. They're actually pretty clever too. So clever that they make regular armies seem downright incompetent. Let us take a look at what makes them so tricky and how our royal architect might stop them. Goblins aren't the strongest or the biggest orcs. They don't have dwarven runesmiths on their side, and they're certainly no match for a good dragon. But what they lack in size and power, they make up for in numbers and smarts. It's not enough to build a tall wall around the castle. Goblins have been known to climb sheer surfaces that would test the resolve of mountain goats. And those little goat-like hooves leave no telltale tracks behind, making their approach completely stealthy. Also, don't bother with a moat. Goblins can tunnel under the ground or simply wait until the drawbridge is lowered and then run across it before anyone knows what happened. That or riding a fish. Don't bother with magic either. Most goblins are too stupid to use it properly. But goblins are surprisingly good at using siege engines, even if they are a little bit too small to operate them properly. Whoops, and let's not forget about goblin spies. One of the best ways to keep secrets safe is to lock them up tight. But a few minutes with a goblin spy, and suddenly the enemy knows your layout better than you do. It's not uncommon for goblins to infiltrate a town or castle by posing as traveling entertainers, hucksters, bards, or peddlers. In fact, goblins have even been known to send spies in as part of a diplomatic mission. Maybe they learned this from watching Game of Thrones. Point is, any castle needs to be defended on the inside as well as the outside. Goblins are persistent too. They don't give up easily, especially when treasure is involved. There have been recorded instances of goblins laying siege to buildings for years on end before finally succeeding. But we're here to talk about defense, not offense. So let's see what the royal architect has come up with. We know from experience that simple defenses won't cut it. So the best option is probably a layered security system, kind of like a giant Russian nesting doll. Each ring of defense is slightly smaller than the last. So even if the goblins manage to get through one layer, they'll still have to contend with the rest. And each ring can have its own unique goblin-proof technology. For example, the outermost ring of the castle walls could be designed with goblins in mind, booby-trapped with things like automated crossbows, drop floors, swinging spiked balls, and so on. The goblins who attempt to scale the outer walls would find themselves chopped up into bite-sized pieces in no time. But as they make their way inward, they'd find that each successive wall gets trickier. The second wall might have a pit filled with sticky blue slime that slows anyone who steps in, giving the castle's defenders time to react. And the third wall might have a series of cages that drop from the ceiling, trapping particularly wily goblins inside. And of course, the inner walls would be designed to protect the king, the princess, and the crown jewels. But wait, we haven't even mentioned the Great Hall yet. What if the goblins simply storm the place and demand that the royal architect hand over the castle blueprints himself? Haha, the Great Hall is protected by an elite guard of royal piemen. They stand shoulder to shoulder in formation, hurling pies at any approaching goblins. Goblins hate pies. Well, at least apple pie. These pies have been specially concocted by the royal chef using a special recipe passed down for generations. Just one bite and any goblin loses the will to live. Or maybe that's just food poisoning. Anyway, once the goblins are sufficiently repulsed, they flee, giving the royal architect time to escape and alert the proper authorities. If all else fails, the royal architect could always resort to Plan Z. He activates the device hidden under the throne, which shoots a beam of anti-gravity rays out of the top of the tower, reversing the polarity of the entire room. Suddenly, the goblins find themselves stuck to the ceiling with nowhere to go. Once the royal architect has secured the castle, he lowers the throne back down and the gravity returns to normal, crushing the goblins to death. This multi-layered defense system is great and all, but it overlooks one very important detail. What happens when the goblins bring a ladder? But we'll elite talk about that after we check out a few more ideas the royal architect could use. How does the king stop a goblin? Easy. He hits them with another goblin. Trained beasts have been used as a military tactic ever since someone first realized that dogs were good at fetching frisbees. And there's no reason to think that goblins were the first to figure that out. That means that if the royal architect can find a beast more clever than a goblin, he'll be well on his way to victory. There are plenty of animals in the fantasy realm that fit the bill, like trained bears, giant eagles, griffins, animated armor, animated suits of armor, killer rabbits, and miniature dragons. The possibilities are endless. But one idea might be even better than trained animals: trained plants. Sure, poison ivy is effective, but imagine a whole field of carnivorous plants surrounding the castle. The goblins who sneak past the outer defenses will find themselves confronted by rows upon rows of gnashing maws and snapping vines. Goblins tend to prefer a more traditional form of warfare, so they'll have a harder time navigating this sort of terrain. Of course, this brings up the question, what if the goblins simply set fire to the plants? That's a fair point, but fortunately, the royal architect was thinking along those same lines. Each plant has been reinforced with powerful wards that prevent it from being burned alive. As such, the royal architect hopes the fire will do more to scorch the goblins than singe the petals. What about a castle built on top of a volcano? Not exactly the easiest place to lay siege to. The lava would make any ground assault pretty tricky. And since the castle is built on top of the volcano, there's no chimney for smoke to escape from. Meaning any fires lit by the goblins would quickly choke them to death. Plus, the heat would cook the goblins before they even reach the main gate. But wouldn't the goblins simply build a raft and sail across the lava? Of course they would. Which is why the royal architect has rigged the river of fire with jets of pressurized air that will shoot out and snuff out any fires foolish enough to try crossing. If that didn't work, he could always resort to Plan Z. Remember the anti-gravity ray? Yeah, that would probably work here too. We've seen a lot of ideas for how the royal architect could stop the goblins, but which one do you think is the best? Let us know in the comments section below, because remember, you not only came for the information, you stayed for the interaction. With so many brilliant ideas on the table, the royal architect felt confident that he could design a castle that even the smartest goblins could infiltrate. And he was right. When the goblins attacked, none of their tricks worked. The anti-gravity ray crushed them, the carnivorous plants ate them, the fire jets scorched them, and the trained badgers bit them. At this point, the goblins were ready to call it quits. They packed up their siege weapons and went home, at least until the king took the treasure out of the castle and left it unguarded. But we'll worry about that problem later. For now, let's just say that the royal architect's design worked like a charm. Thanks for watching. Do you have a good idea for how the king could stop the goblins? Put it in the comments below. And if you liked this video, consider checking out another one. But don't click that button just yet. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any more content. Okay, I'll see you over there.